Hey guys, and welcome to the 6th episode of the Inventory Remake 2024 series. I believe in the last episode we got set up the item information section where you can select an item and it shows information, and we also updated the display to show whether or not items are equipped, and also to update the equip button based on whether or not the item is equipped as well. But none of these buttons actually do anything, and we also added a display to the hotbar, but it also doesn't do anything yet. So what we're going to be working on in this episode is we're going to be setting up the equip button right here to equip to the hotbar, and then after that we'll likely be moving to adding, so you can click on the hotbar or click the corresponding key number and it will actually let you select the items on the hotbar and hold them basically, right? So getting started, let's move on to the starter player script client, inventory client, and this is where we're going to be working on for the inventory, or for the equip button, because if you remember from previous episodes, we already have the equip to hotbar, unequip from hotbar functions, and they're already being used in a couple of different places. Like equip to hotbar is being used here whenever in register item, whenever a new stack is created. If there's empty hotbar slots, it'll automatically equip it to that empty hotbar slot, which is why when I run the game, those items equipped here, right? But we can use those functions we already have from the client to determine or to do the functionality of equipping and unequipping. And on the client, we just need to decide when you want to equip and when we want to unequip based on the user's input. Some variables we'll be using is the equip button right here, which is, obvious, right? And we already have a function set up right here on equip button. So this runs whenever the equip button is pressed. If you notice down over here, right? It prints equip button pressed, and it does the same thing even if it says unequip, right? So this is going to be one function this is going to be the entire function for equipping and unequipping. So the first thing we want to do is we want to find what stack is currently equipped based on the selected stack ID we created right here. So in order to do that, let's see, I lost it. Where is it? Right here. So we're going to do finding stack data. So we have the stack ID already in theory. Local stack data, assuming there is a selected item, which there might not be, right? Or client. So we're gonna run the find stack data from ID function we made, I believe, in the last episode, and we need the stack ID. So we're just gonna provide inventory client dot selected stack ID, and just pretty much just leave it as that. If selected stack ID is nil, then we can see that this function would simply just not return anything, because it would loop through all of the stacks in inventory, and it would find that none of them are equal to the stack ID because the stack ID has nil, right? And none of them have a stack ID of nil. And so it would simply just not ever run this, and it would just get down here to the end and it won't return anything. To make this a little bit simpler though, just to reduce unnecessary complexity, I'm going to add a line up here. If stack ID equals nil, then return end. And that's basically just going to say, okay, so if we provide a nil stack ID, instead of going through the entire list of stacks before then just returning nil, we're just going to return nil right away, right? Just save us the time. But that's not going to change anything functionality wise. So anyway, but that's just so we can know that, like, what's going to happen when we run this. If selected stack ID is nil, well, we're just not going to have a stack data, right? So it won't create an error or anything. So then we want to check what mode the button is currently in, because if you remember, we set it up to where the button will update based on whether or not the item is currently equipped. So checking button mode. Equip b.text. We're just going to use the text to determine this, and in some cases using text, which can be modified locally to determine something, isn't the best idea. But in this case, because the reason it's not the best idea sometimes is because it's very exploitable for like a hacker, because a hacker essentially has the power of a local script and they could change the text to whatever they want it to be, right? But in this case, them changing the text, all that's going to change is whether it runs the unequip function or the equip function. It's not going to really do anything, because if they already have it equipped and they try to equip it again, well, what's that going to do for them, right? So it's perfectly fine in this case to do this. So we're going to check, okay, if the text is equipped, and we're also going to check if selected stack ID is not equal. And if this is the case, that means the equip button is currently what we want to run function for, right? And you could also, alternatively, instead of saying selected stack ID is not equal to nil, you could also do stack data is not equal to nil. Either way would work. It's pretty much the same thing. I think this is more intuitive for like reading over it and understanding what it's trying to do. So I'm going to leave it like that. And then in the case that it's an unequip, okay, in the case that we want to unequip rather than equip, I'm going to do an else if equip b.text equals unequip. So we're also going to want to add this condition down here as well, and just make sure that if we're unequipping, we also want to make sure that that we have an item selected. Otherwise, I mean, what item are we supposed to unequip, right? To make things simpler, let's start off with the bottom portion because that's going to be a lot easier. So if stack data, let's see, if stack data, although I might actually change this as well to simply be stack data. It's not equal to nil. And I mentioned earlier that inventory.selectStackID is not equal to nil might be more intuitive, but there's also a chance that maybe something goes wrong and this returns nil when selectStackID isn't nil. And in that case, we don't want to try running stuff on stack data if it's nil. So I'm going to check this instead because I think that would actually help prevent more bugs. So if stack data, the item type equals armor, then, and then else. So I don't believe we have the armor function set up yet. So I'm just going to put a warning here, and then I'm just going to put a little, okay, so that's just a reminder for later, right? So then all we need to do now for the unequipping portion is go to the server. So we know we have at the very top here, actually. Okay, we need to connect some signals. So because we want to be able to run equip to Hotbar and unequip from Hotbar from the client. And these are functions that are perfectly fine to be ran from the client because they don't actually they don't give the player any tools or anything. So if a hacker fires these themselves, then it's not going to really do anything if they don't have the item, it only allows them to equip items they have, right? So we're going to connect these to be ran on the client, or not ran on the client, but triggered from the client. So we're going to do signal.listen remote, and then we're going to do inventory server equip to Hotbar, and then inventory server.equip to Hotbar. And then we're going to do the same thing, listen remote, oops, inventory, remote, inventory server, unequip from, okay. So now this will allow us to run these two functions from the client by simply firing this specific signal key, right? So then whenever the unequip button is pressed, if the item type is not equal to armor, we're going to go to this else, and we're going to say signal.fireServer, and we're going to say inventory server. And then as for other things we need to specify, equip from Hotbar, it takes a stack ID we want to unequip as well, so we want to make sure we provide the stack ID. So we're going to do inventory client.selected stack ID. And the player is already provided automatically since we're doing a fire server from the client, and it uses a remote event, so it automatically provides the player that fired the server. So we don't need to provide that ourselves. And so now, the armor portion aside, this should handle the unequipping of items. So if I have this item, it's already equipped to the hotbar, and I unequip it, suddenly it unequips, and it looks like it works perfectly fine, right? And if it doesn't work perfectly fine for you, I would recommend going here into the inventory server and debugging the unequip from hotbar function, because it's likely that you don't have this set up quite right if it's not working. But now I'm going to move on to the equip portion, and the reason this is going to be a lot more complicated is because we need to have the player somehow specify where they want it to equip, and there's a few different ways you could do this. I know a lot of people do like a drag and drop system where they can just kind of click on it, drag it, and drop it here, wherever they want to put it, right? And then, I mean, there's different ways you could do it. What I ended up going for was a system where essentially, let me pull up the completed system so I can show you guys. So if I have, so I'm going to unequip this item. So if I wanted to equip this to slot 8, I press equip, and gives this little text, press the slot to equip to or the corresponding keyboard key. So I can then press slot 8 and it'll equip to slot 8. Then I can unequip it, or I can press the key 8 and it'll equip to slot 8, right? And so that's what I ended up going for. There's other ways you could do it, like maybe you just click equip and then you click on, or maybe, I know like, I feel like I've seen some games that just, you click on the item and then while it's selected, you click on the hotbar and it puts it there, right? So you could do that too, and then you wouldn't even need the equip button. But there's different ways you could do it. But this is how I'm going to do it in this series. Okay, so in this portion, for the equip button, we're going to display the instructions first, because essentially if you're pressing the equip button, you want to make sure that you know what to do afterwards, right? Instructions. So we're going to create a new janitor object, because this is going to make it easier to clean up the instructions once we're done. Because there's going to be some cleanup work that we'll need to do, and it'll be nice to be able to keep track of everything we do, right? So local temp janitor equals janitor.new. And then, remember this is the janitor module we required up here. And then we're going to do instruct t.visible equals true. And then we're going to do temp janitor get chore function instruct t.visible equals false. And so what this is going to do, so we set instruct t, which is this text right here. It's a variable reference up here. And we're going to take that and we're going to set that to be invisible. We're going to set that to be visible so they can see it. If there's an item already selected, they'll also already be able to see the item info, so we don't need to worry about that. So they'll be able to see the text, and then we also want to change what the text says. But what this line is doing right here is it's adding a function, which the only thing the function does is it turns it back to invisible again. And so whenever we run tempGenitor.clean or tempGenitor:clean, then it'll run this function as well as any other chores that we give to the janitor. And so this is just essentially the cleanup chore for this specific thing that we've done. And so we're going to keep track of the cleanup chores for each thing that we do. That way we can just run tempGenitor:clean and it'll do all those things for us, and we don't have to worry about forgetting things or anything like that. So we can do b.text equals, so we can do a little thing like this. Yeah, just to kind of signify, so we're changing the equip button's text. We want to change it to something other than equip or unequip, otherwise players might be able to trigger these functions again if they like press the button again, and we don't want that to be able to happen. We want to essentially disable the button temporarily, which changing the text will do. And so I'm just changing it to something kind of basic, something that indicates that there's an equip in progress and that we don't want them to press this button anymore, right? And then I'm going to do tempGenitor function b.text equals equip. And this is the same thing as before, just kind of keeping track of what we changed so we can change it back when we're done. Right? Now I'm going to check the item type, check if it's armor or if it's a hotbar, or if it's a regular item, because that's going to change how we want to actually go about giving the instructions and what the player does to equip the item, right? So I'm going to do if stack data.item type equals armor, then, and we're not going to do this part yet, so I'm going to do the whole thing right here, because we don't have those functions set up yet. I'm going to do else. And so now if it's not an armor item, then we're going to do, this is going to be a little bit complicated. Prompting selection, local chosen, or let's call this variables, local chosen slot equals nil, local slot num equals nil. And chosen slot is going to be the hotbar slot that we chose. So that's going to be a text button. And slot number is just going to be a number, which is, obvious. And that's going to be the number of the slot we chose. So if we choose slot 3, then it would set this variable to the frame, and it would set this variable to the number 3. And that's something we're going to do in just a second. And then, so there's a couple different things we need to do here. First, we need to detect keyboard inputs for computer players, and then we also need to detect button inputs for pressing these buttons for mobile players and for computer players as well, if they prefer to do it that way. And so first we're going to listen to keyboard inputs. So we're going to do inputs, tempGenitor, give chore. We're going to do uis.input again, connect function input, which is a user input or input object, that's what it is. And then gain process event, which is a boolean. And we have this function, and so there's a lot of things here. So the janitor give chore function has a variety of functionality. In this case, we're just adding functions as chores, and those functions are ran when we do tempGenitor:clean. In this case, we're adding a signal connection as a chore, and whenever tempGenitor.clean is ran, then it'll disconnect that connection essentially, right? And so that's why we're able to just kind of nest the whole connection within the tempGenitor give chore, and that'll just add that as something that'll clean up whenever we run tempGenitor:clean. All right. So then in the input, so this is going to run, anything in here is going to run whenever the user does any sort of input. So you want to say if game processed event, then return end. This means if the GUI somehow processes the input, so like if you type the letter A and you happen to type it into the chat box, then we don't want to count that because it was already processed by the chat box. We don't want to count that input, right? And there's other things, I think like clicking GUI to press a GUI button, I think it might ignore it, I'm not too sure. But so we want to return if game processed event, and we also want to do if input.userinputType is not equal to, not equal to enum.userinputType.keyboard, then return end. And so we only want to listen to keyboard input in this case, because we're going to do the mobile portion in a second. But for this, we just want to listen to keyboard input. So we're going to ignore any inputs that aren't keyboard input, and then selecting slot. So then what we want to do here is we want to use, I don't know if we have have it set up yet. So we're gonna need to set up a table that maps the keyboard keys to each individual slot. So we want the keyboard key 1 to be mapped to slot 1, right? And so on. And so we're going to create a table that'll map those for us. So I'm going to do local keys to slots, and then we're going to do enum.keycode.1 equals hotbar f dot slot 1. And that's just referencing hotbar slot 1, right? And so now we're going to do this for all 10 slots. Okay, so now we have all 10 slots mapped here from 1 to 0, 1 to 10 essentially, but with 0 representing 10. And then we're going to go back down here on equip button. So now we're going to use the input.keycode. It's a property of an input object. Input.keycode is going to be the key that was pressed, or the key code that was pressed. So it's going to be an enum.keycode whatever key it is, right? And so we're going to use that to check if the key is one of the keys in our table that we just defined. And then if it is, we're going to have that slot be the selected slot, right? For key slot F, so key.keycode slot F is going to be a text button in pairs keys to slots. Although technically we don't need the pairs here, but I have a habit of typing that. I don't know if there's that much of a difference. The pairs might be technically more efficient, but this is just simpler to read, so I'm going to do that. Anyway, so if input.keycode equals key, then what we're going to do, so chosen slot equals slot F, temp janitor, or slot F, janitor, and then clean, and then return. So let me go through this. So basically, looping through every pair of key codes and the frame, right? So we're going to loop through this table, and what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, the key is going to be the key code, and then the slot F is going to be the slot that is related to that key code, right? And so then we're going to do, if the input.keycode is equal to that key that we're currently looping through, then we're going to say chosen slot equals that slot, and then we're going to run temp generator clean. So that's going to reset these both back to normal, and it's going to disconnect this connection, which means that it'll stop listening to input, right? And then we're going to return to just prevent anything else after this from running. And then if they input a key that isn't one of those keys, and then it doesn't return, then we're going to go down here and we're going to say we're going to cancel the operation, right? So we're going to say instruct t.text. Yeah, so we're going to say instruct t.text, and we're going to set that equal to error not a valid key. That'll essentially let users know that what they pressed isn't a valid key, and then it'll just cancel the whole operation. And if they want to equip it, they can just press the button again. Type janitor, hit chore, and then we want to reset this after the janitor is cleaned. So we're going to do instruct t.text equals client dot. I don't think we have this defined yet, so I'm going to leave that there for a second. I'm going to go all the way up here, and I'm going to do inventory client dot equip instruct text equals instruct t.text. So basically what we're doing, so if you look at this instruction text right here, right, we already have it specified as the text that we want. And so now this is going to store that text at the start of the game in this key. And so even if we change this text, we'll still have a reference to what it was originally, and we're going to use that reference down here, wherever it was. We're going to use that reference right here in order to reset it. So inventory client dot instruct text end. And so, okay, so yeah, so basically what we're going to do here, so we set the text to error not about a key, and we add a chore that says that we're going to set the text back to what it was originally after the janitor's cleaned, right? Or after the janitor cleans. And then we're going to wait 2 seconds, and we're going to do temp janitor clean. Just so it displays the text for 2 seconds, and then it clears everything out and resets it. So now we're just going to test this. Actually first, so right now all this is going to do is it's going to wait until, or it's going to connect these functions, but it's not actually going to do anything with what the chosen slot is. And so what we want to do is we're going to do waiting for selection. So we want to repeatedly wait until a selection is made, and then after a selection is made, or maybe it cleans the temp generator here, then we want to set everything. Then we want to actually equip that slot and run the server's function, right? So we're going to do waiting for selection while not chosen slot, do task.wait end. And so this is going to essentially it's a while loop, but I'm just putting it all in one line, right? So normally it would be like this. And so I'm just going to repeatedly wait until chosen slot is equal to something other than nil. So you could also rephrase this as while chosen slot is equal to nil, do test our weight. So we're going to do if slot num equals nil, then so wait for chosen slot to not be nil, and if slot num is nil when chosen slot isn't, then we want to find what the slot number is, because in order to actually equip to the hotbar, we have to specify the slot to equip to, rather than specifying the frame itself. Since the server doesn't have access to the frame, we want to specify the specific slot number to equip it to, and so we want to find what the slot number is based on the frame. And we can do that by I believe we can do that by simply doing local, so I guess this slot num equals table.find hotbar slots and then slot f, chosen slot rather. And so what this is going to do is it's going to loop through here, right? And it's going to find if any of the values in hotbar slots, which is just like an array table, if any of those values are equal to the chosen slot, it's going to return the index at which that value was found, which is going to be equivalent to the slot number because these were all in the correct order, right? So this is index 1, index 2, index 3, all the way to index 10, which is what we're going to be using for the slot 0. So then that should get us our slot number if slot number is no. And then we're going to fire the function to equip it. So signal is going to be the same as before, signal.fire server, inventory server, equip to hotbar, slot number, stack data, stack ID. So there we go. So basically we're going to say, we're going to run the function equip to hotbar. If we go up here, that's this function. It needs the slot to equip to and the stack ID. So we just provide the slot number, stack ID. It already provides the player just like before. And so this should work for keyboard inputs and not for button presses yet. We're going to do that in a second. But let's just test this first to make sure this works. So we unequip, it works, it's great. Equip, you can see it changes the button text, and if I spam the button, it doesn't do anything now because the button text isn't equip or unequip, so it's not going to do either. And then it's going to say press the slot to equip to or the corresponding keyboard key. We haven't set up the button clicks yet, but if I press the key 8 on my keyboard, it equips to slot 8. It seems like that works fine, right? And now it shows unequip, right? I can equip it wherever I want. Which works great. Cool. You can also see it refreshes this text as well. So then if I press the key G, or not a valid key, and then it resets it. And I can try it again, right? And I can do slot 4. There we go, cool. And this isn't supposed to happen, but I think that's just because we don't have arm equipping set up. But this is an armor item, so we're going to get that set up and that'll work a little bit differently. But yeah, cool. It looks like it works. So now we're going to set up the button pressing, which is going to be pretty simple. We're just going to add a little portion above the waiting for selection. So this is going to be passively waiting for keyboard inputs. It's not going to like stop the code from running because it'll just be running this until chosen slot is equal to anything other than nil, basically, right? And so this will be running in the background. And we're going to create another thing that's also going to be running in the background. Or we're going to create a series of connections. So button presses for I, slot F. Slot F is going to be a text button. In hotbar slots do. So we're going to loop through all the hotbar slots, and we're going to say temp janitor give chore, so that way we can clean it up. And we're going to do slot f.mouse button one click connect function. So now we're going to listen. So we're going to loop through all the hotbar slots, and for each one we're going to listen for button clicks, and this will also run for mobile users. So do note that. So this will work for mobile users as well, and it'll run this whenever any of those particular buttons are pressed, and we can access which button it is by just simply using slot F. And then it's also adding that as a chore to the janitor, so that way whenever we do temp janitor clean, it's going to disconnect all those connections, so that way it doesn't clutter up the memory with a bunch of connections, right? And also cause bugs. So then when any of these slots are pressed, we're going to do chosen slot equals slot F, and we're going to do slot num. Since we already have the slot number, we're just going to set that to I, because that's essentially, it's the same thing as down here, but we already have the slot number, and that's why I have this check here, because this portion we can find the slot number easily. But in this portion, it's a little bit harder. We have to do the table.find, right? But since we have this, so then this won't run, right? So slot num equals I, then temp janitor clean. That'll disconnect all the connections, and it'll let everything else continue, right? It'll reset all the buttons, and then this will run because now chosen slot isn't nil, right? So then this will run, and then this will run. So let's see. If we do unequip, and we do equip, now if I press slot 8 with my mouse, it looks like it works. And I can use either keyboard keys or I can press the slots. It seems like it works good. So now that we have that set up, the next thing we're going to do, I'm going to make this invisible again. The next thing we want to do is make so we can actually do something with the hotbar, right? So now we can equip things to it, we can unequip it, we can customize it as we want, but we can't actually like hold any of the items, so it kind of doesn't do us any good. And so that's what we're going to set up now. So the first thing we want to do is first thing we're going to do is actually going to work on the client side to set up the input detection for when we want to hold the items and when we want to stop holding them. And then we're going to set up the server side that actually does the holding and unholding. So there's going to be a couple of functions we're going to set up real quick. So minimize everything using Control-Shift-E if you didn't know that, or Control-E to expand everything. It's pretty useful. And then under Set Equip button right here, we're going to set up a function called toggle hold. So toggling held item and function inventory client dot toggle hold and the slot number, which is going to be a number. And then in this function, so this function is it's going to be a pretty simple function, but it'll be what runs the server's functions for holding items and unholding items, and it'll just toggle. So if we have, say, slot 1 is currently being held, and then we try to click on slot 1 again, we want to unhold that item. But if it's not currently being held and we click on slot 1, we want to hold it. And so this is going to be one function that'll just toggle it. So if it's on, it'll turn it off. If it's off, it'll turn it on, basically, right? And so on the client side, this is going to be pretty simple. But, okay, so let's see. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do if inventory client dot held. Okay, so I need a new value. So we're going to go up here. Inventory client dot held slot num equals nil. And so this is going to be the slot number for the current slot that's currently being held, if there is one. So then down here, there's an error down here, which I believe is coming from here. Sorry. So if inventory client dot held slot num equals slot num, then we're going to do an else. So this right here is the portion where we want to say unhold item, right? And then here's the portion where we want to say hold item. And we're going to actually set up the functionality later. But this is how we're going to check whether we want to hold it or unhold it. And then we're going to do the update held item function, which, so we're going to set up a new function. Let's see. So update held item function in client dot update held item. And this is going to update this variable based on what tool appears to be currently held in the character, right? What tool the character seems to be holding. And we can check that by simply, if we revert to the default inventory system, right? So if I get rid of all this, if I just disable the client script, it'll default back to the original inventory system. If you remember correctly, right, in the character, so when you hold an item, it moves it inside your character. So we can use that to check which item is currently being held, right? So we're going to use that. Let's see. So first thing we need is some character variables. Equal char model equals character. If char, then return end. If the character dies or something, then we want to not run this function, otherwise it'll make errors happen. Local tool, which is a tool, equals char find first child of class tool. And so this is a useful function, which is like find first child, but instead of specifying the name of the child, we specify the class name of the child. I also just realized I need to re-enable this. But so anyway, so we're going to look for the first child, anything we can find inside the character that has the class name tool, which is just going to be any tool that's in the character, right? And if there's nothing there, then it'll just give us none, or no, right? So we're going to check if there's a tool, then this is what we're going to run in order. So if there's a tool, then we know something is equipped, right? And then if there's not a tool, setting all, I'm going to do that later. But if there's not a tool, then the else portion will run, right? So if there's a tool currently equipped, it'll run this portion. If there isn't, it'll run this portion. So we're going to find, if there's a tool currently equipped, we're going to find which hotbar slot that tool corresponds to, if any, right? So finding slot for I equals 1, 10 do. So we're going to loop through all the hotbar slots, or we're going to loop through the numbers 1 through 10, right? And we're going to say local stack ID equals, and this is also going to be a number, so I'm going to specify these types here. So local stack ID equals inventory client dot end data dot hotbar, and we're going to specify slot dot I. And so we're looping through the numbers 1 through 10, and then we're going to say, we're going to look at the inventory data, and we'll look at the hotbar. And the hotbar, if we remember correctly, right? If we go to arcade storage types, the hotbar has slot 1, slot 2, all the way to slot 10. And so if we just do the string slot dot dot the number, then that'll be whatever, like, stack ID, because these are going to be set to the stack ID, right? So that'll be whatever stack is the ID of whatever stack is currently equipped in that hotbar slot, or it'll be nil. So then we're going to do equal stack data, which is going to be type stack data to inventory client dot find stack data from ID, and we're going to get, and this is also going to be potentially nil, and also this potentially nil, find stack data from ID, and we're going to specify stack ID. And remember, if stack ID is nil, it's just going to return nil here instead of giving an error, so we don't need to worry about that. And then we're going to do if stack data is not equal to nil, and table.find stack data.items tool then. So then we're going to do num equals I break. So basically what's going on here, right? So we find the stack ID of the slot, so we're looping through all the slots, we find the stack ID of the slot we're looping through, and we find the stack data that's currently equipped in that slot, right? And we check, okay, if there is a stack data currently equipped in that slot, then we loop through the items of that stack data, we check in the items of that stack data if this tool that's currently in the player's character is in that list of items, and if it is, we set slot num equal to that slot number right here. And then we break, which will just end this for loop. So this all together is just finding the slot number for whatever this tool is, right? If there is one, which it might be no, right? You might have a case where a weird bug happens and there's a tool in the player's character, but that tool isn't in their hotbar, in which case this will just be nil, and we probably want to unequip that tool, right? Which we're going to do in a second. So updating if slot num not equal to nil, then else. So now if slot number is equal to nil, then this is what we want to do. This is where we want to do inventory client.held item, held slot num equals nil. So we want to set that to nil, and then we want to do signal, or I guess I'll just do a print statement because we don't have the signal set up yet. I'm going to do print unhold items, right? And this is because if there's a tool equipped and that tool isn't in the hotbar anywhere, then we don't want that tool to be currently held. Otherwise, that's kind of an issue, right? And so it'll just unequip. We're going to run a function here. Right now it won't do anything, but we're going to run a function here that'll unequip that item, or unhold that item rather. So then if we do find a slot num for that, then what we want to do is update the held slot num value to the specific slot number, and then we want to update the slots to, like, change their colors, right? So we want to essentially the same as how we did it in the inventory, where the currently selected item is yellow or something, right? And we're also going to need to add attributes for that, just like before. So I'm going to go over to each of these slots. I'm going to click the bottom one, I'm going to hold shift and click the top one, and that'll select all of them. And then I'm going to click on attribute, and I'm going to make a color 3 attribute. I'm going to call it normal color, and then I'm going to look up here, copy this background color, I'm going to paste that there. So that's going to be the normal color when it's not selected, and then we're going to do another color 3. I'm going to call this one selected color. And I'm going to put the color 220, 220, 150, which is like a slight hint of yellow, right? You can do whatever color you want. So now that should be added to all of these slots. Cool. So then, if we find the slot that the currently equipped tool is in, we're going to do inventory client.held slot num equals slot num. So we can use that in our toggle hold function, right? Because that's what our toggle hold function uses, is this value right here. And then we're going to do local slot f, which is a text button, equals hotbar slots slot num, and then for I, other slot f, which is also text button, and hotbar slots 2. So we're going to essentially, so we have the slot, this is the slot of the item that's currently being held, and then we're going to loop through every slot, and if that specific slot that we loop through is the slot that's currently being held, right, then we want to change the color, other slot f dot background color 3 equals to other slot f get attribute. We want to change it to the selected color, right? And so we want to visually display that that item is selected. If it's not the currently held item, then we want to set it back to the normal color. And so this will be one loop that'll loop through all the hotbar slots and update their color to match whatever slot is currently equipped. And so now, I don't think this function is connected anywhere. I'm gonna go down here. So If there isn't a tool that's currently equipped, we want to revert all the hotbar slots back to normal. So I'm just going to do something similar here. I'm going to do setting all slots back to normal, just so we don't have like a slot that appears equipped when it's not. For I comma slot F and hotbar slots do. I'm also going to specify that this is a text button. Slot F dot background color 3 equals slot F get attribute normal color. And we're also going to do import client dot held slot num equals no. So now we need to actually run this function. As for where we want to run it, we want to run it once at the start of the game, which shouldn't really do anything, I don't think, but just for safety measure. You're probably not going to start with an item currently held. But we're going to run that once there. We're also going to run it in here. So anytime we update the data, anytime this inventory client update function, or anytime this signal is called from the server, signifying that something has changed in the inventory, then we want to update what the currently held item is, because we want to be able to fire this when we set up the functions in here to hold and unhold items, and then it'll just automatically run this whenever we change what item is currently held, right? And I believe that should be everywhere that this is ran. So now it won't do anything, I don't think, because we need to kind of set up the server side in order for it to do anything. But the server side should be relatively simple. But yeah, so I'm going to move on to that now. It might have made more sense to do the server side first, but it would also be hard to test the server side without having the client side set up. So sorry for the confusion there, but we're going to set up the server side now, and we're just going to set up two functions, one for holding a specific item and one for unholding whatever item is currently held. So we're going to go under this get inventory data function. We're going to do equip or holding item function inventory server dot hold item player slot number. And so the player is going to be a player object. The slot number is going to be number. So then we're going to say, okay, hold item. Okay, cool. So yeah, we don't have that set up yet, so I'm going to do that later. But we're going to go down to this function that we just made, hold item, and we're going to say we're going to look for the stack that corresponds to this slot number. And so we're going to do finding stack is type slot inventory equals inventory server dot all inventories player. And we're going to do local stack data, type stack data equals no. I'm just going to put a question mark there. So then we're going to do for slot key, which is going to be a string, and stack ID, which is going to be a number, in.hotbar do. So I'm going to say if slot key equals slot num, then, so we're going to loop through all the hotbar slots, and we're going to say, okay, if that hotbar slot is equal to the slot num specified, then we're going to do stack data equals inventory server. We're going to set up a new function, but it's going to be the same function as, if you remember from down here, the find stack data from ID. We're going to set up that function on the server as well. So above here, we're going to do finding stack data from ID, function inventory server, find stack from ID player, and it's going to be pretty simple. I'm pretty sure we can just copy and paste this code for the most part. Okay, it's going to be a little bit different, I guess. But we're going to do, okay, if stack ID equals nil, then return end. And then we're going to do for I comma stack data, type stack data, in all inventories player inventory do. So we're going to loop through all the stacks in the player's inventory, and we're going to say if stack data dot stack ID equals stack ID, then return stack data. And so now we can use the stack ID to get the stack data. So that's what we're going to do in here. We're going to say server dot find stack data from ID, and specify stack ID. And we're going to break to end the loop. So it's going to loop through all the hotbar slots. It's going to see which one is that slot number, and then it's going to give us that stack ID if there is one. There might not be one, right? And so then we're going to do equipping. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to actually do a call to a function we're going to create real quick. So this is going to be our hold item function, and then we're going to create an unholding items function, right? And so this will unhold whatever is currently being held, right? I'm not going to do anything here yet because we're not going to get there yet, but we are going to call it right here and just simply do like that, right? So before we actually hold this specific item, we want to get rid of whatever item was being held before. And so we can just run this function, which we'll set up later, right? So we're going to do if stack data is not equal to nil, then first we're going to look at our stack because we have the stack data. We just verified that it's not nil. And so what we're going to do is we're going to simply get the first tool in that stack's list of items, and then we're just going to put that tool in the player's character. So we're going to do local pool equals stack pool equals stack data dot items. So it's going to be the first item in the list. If not player dot character, then return end. So if the player doesn't have a character, we don't want to try adding the tool to the character because then it'll just give us an error. But if it does have a character, we're going to do tool.parent equals player.character. And we're going to fire the signal to update the client. So signal.fire client, that's for the player, and then do inventory client. Let's see, what was it? Inventory client update. And that will run on the client, the function we created earlier. And we're going to do, I believe we just specified env. Yeah. So that'll run over here, right? So that'll run all this stuff, which will also run the update held item, which will change the display of what currently appears to be held. So this will essentially update the client side to visually display what item is currently being held, right? So this is the entire hold item function. We're also going to set up unhold items function, just because I don't think it'll work without it. We're going to set that up real quick. And we're going to do unequipping local char equals player dot. This is going to be char model player dot character. And as usual, if not char, then local hum equals char. Find first child humanoid. If not hum, then return end. And then we're going to run this simple function, humanoid unequipped tools. This is a very useful function. It'll just take any of the tools in the player's character and it'll throw them back in the backpack. So this will do our job for us basically, right? And then all we need to do is update the client. Signal, fire client, player, and that does our job for us. Now, the very last thing we need to do in order for this to work is to connect these functions to the client side, so that way the client can actually run these. I also realized I don't have the inventory right here, so I'm going to do inventory server.all inventory is player. Problem solved. So we need to create signals for these two functions, right? So we're going to go up here all the way to the top. We're going to add two more signals. Signal.listen remote inventory server hold item. And we're going to do inventory server.hold item. We're going to do signal.listen remote inventory server unhold items with an S. Inventory server.unhold items. Cool. So now we can run these from the client. And so if you remember our print statements, so we want to unhold the items. So signal fire server unhold items. All right. Then here we want to hold the item. Signal.fire server inventory server hold item, and we want to specify the slot number, which we have here. So then where else do we have? So we have unhold items here as well. So we're going to do signal.fire server. Also, if you don't remember, I'm just using Control F to find these prints. Now I just lost where it was. But you can use Control F and just search the word print, and I added prints everywhere that I needed to do that. All right, here it is. Fire server, inventory server, and this one, what was this one? Updating, I think this is where we want to unhold the items. So unhold items, and then yeah, that should be it. So now, assuming I didn't make any typos or anything, it should allow us to hold and unhold items, except I don't think we actually set it up yet, because we also need to actually set it up to detect the input, which I probably should have done first, because it makes it hard to test anything else. But that should be easy to set up real quick, so we're going to do that. So we're going to go into inventory client, the very top in the star function. Okay, so we have the open close and we have the buttons. Under this, we're going to connect each slot button. Connecting. So we're going to do for icon the slot F, which is an item, or which is a text button. Then hotbar slots do. We're going to loop through all the hotbar slots. We're going to say slot F, mouse button one click, connect, on client, toggle hold, and specify the slot number. So that's basically the whole thing for this isn't going to include user input though, so we're going to set that up as well. This will just include pressing the buttons, but that should allow us to test and see that it does not work. So what I'm going to do for debugging is I'm going to press a little breakpoint here, toggle hold. Okay, so step into, let's see. So we see slot number is 4. That's the slot we just pressed, and we see we've held slot number is 0, so it's not equal to that. Step over, and it goes into here. I don't know if this will work well. This might be a little interesting. Oh, did that work? No? Okay. I'm just going to do some debugging off camera and I will get back. Okay, I found the issue. Let me get rid of my print statements. It's a very simple issue on my end. So all I did was I forgot. So when I'm running this find the stack data from ID function, it takes 2 arguments, the player and the stack ID. I forgot the player argument. So that's my bad. And now we can see it works fine. And we can see I can hold it and unhold it. Hold it, unhold it. And I can click between them. It doesn't have any weird issues because it unholds whenever you hold, right? So it unholds all the items and then it holds the new one, right? So it works great. And if we can, I think if we hold it and we unequip it, it looks like it also runs the unhold, which I'm not too sure what causes that to happen, but if it works, it works. Cool. Looks like it works good. And so now the very last thing we need to do is simply set up to where we can also press the keyboard keys as well, which is pretty simple. So let's do that. And that will be the last thing for this episode. So do we have an input began function? Let's see. Minimize everything on input began. We're going to use this. So in the input began function, we're using this for opening and closing. We also want to do another section for flipping slots. So this is where we're going to loop through that keys to slots table we made earlier, right here. And we're going to use that again. So for key, enum.keycode, slot f, set button, in keys to slots, to input.keycode if the key that we pressed is equal to the specific slots key. We're going to do the client.toggleHold, find Hotbar slots, slot f. And we're also going to do break. So basically what's going on here, we loop through all the pairs of key codes and slots. If the key that was pressed, because this is on input began, right? So it runs anytime there's an input. If the key that was pressed is the key in question, we run the toggle hold function for that specific hotbar slot. And this is just finding the slot number for the hotbar slot. But it might return nil. So this might be nil. So you do want to add some sort of double check for that. So I'm going to go into this function. And I'm going to say if num equals, let's see, wait. Yeah, I'm just going to say if slot num equals nil, then return end. So that way, if somehow this function gets ran without the slot num, it's just going to not do anything. So that way it doesn't create an error. But that should be what we need for connecting the keyboard inputs as well. Right here. So let's test that out. So now if I press the 1 key, looks like it works. Cool. So that will be the end of this episode. It's a bit of a long episode, but I hope you guys enjoyed. As always, you can join my Discord server linked on my YouTube channel in the description and, in various different places for asking coding help or just for chatting with other people. You can purchase $299 membership on either YouTube or Patreon if you want access to the tutorial files for all my videos, including this one. And I also have higher memberships available for tutoring options if you're interested on one-on-one tutoring with me and like a voice chat or whatever, and I can help you with your projects, I can help you with whatever, I can teach you specific things depending on whatever you want, right? But nonetheless, thank you for watching and I hope you enjoyed.